Hello, and welcome once again to episode 14 of Code Completion. We are a group of iOS developers and educators hoping to share what we love most about development, Apple technology, and completing your code. My name once again is Dimitri, and I'll be your host for this episode. And I'm joined today by my fellow completionists, Spencer
Hey there.
and Ben.
Hey, hey.
So before we begin, Apple has yet another event planned for us on Tuesday. One more thing, as they call it, with a period. So that means it's the last thing of the year. And they're certainly not going to announce anything else after that. So we thought we might go around and make some quick and probably obvious at this point predictions as far as what they are going to announce. So Spencer, what do you think is coming on Tuesday?
Well, as the rumors state, it should be something like three new MacBooks, I believe, two 13-inch MacBook Pros and a 16-inch, if I remember correctly.
I think it's an
and
Air, a Pro, and then the Big Pro.
Oh,
I think were the predictions.
gotcha. Okay, so an Air, a 13 MacBook Pro, and a 16 MacBook
Yeah.
Pro. And then I also saw that someone had found some benchmark results of the A14Z chip, I believe, or X. So that's interesting. And apparently, the single core score there was about the same as the A14 chip that are in the iPad Air, the new iPhones. However, the multi-core score was significantly higher. I want to say almost double the score of an iPhone 12 Pro. So it seems like there's quite a bit more thermal headroom there, which is pretty cool and exciting. What's crazy to me is I believe someone was saying that that's the first Apple chip to clock over 3.2 gigahertz, which clock speed isn't everything, but it's people are saying that it's going to be more or less comparative to the Intel i9 chips that are in MacBook Pros today. And so if that's the case, I don't know how they're doing it, but Apple Silicon is pretty crazy because I believe that it's also only an 8-core chip, and half of those cores are like the little, like the low, or the
Called high efficiency
Low
cores.
performance.
Not
High
low performance,
efficiency.
high efficiency.
Right, high efficiency, yes. And so, and in that just creates this whole other thing of like, okay, well, if you've really only got four cores that are powerful, power cores, then when you start throwing in more chips later down the line, I'm not sure if it would be for this event by any means, but how many cores would they get up to in order to have something like a Mac Pro eventually, if they don't pull a one more thing in this one more thing event or something like that, right? So it's super exciting. I don't know more than that. I'm not assuming AirTags or anything. I think it's probably just going to be Apple Silicon from everything that I've heard.
Yeah, something that seems
And
to
you
be pretty clear from their last couple events is that they're, because they're pre-recorded, because they're more focused, they don't seem to be pulling any too much in the way of like, oh, by the way, here's a whole thing that's totally unrelated to the things we're already you knew that we were presenting. We're going to do those separately.
Yeah.
So that's I guess good in the sense that we probably won't be surprised by stuff, but I guess also bad if you like that idea, if you like being surprised with weird new things.
I guess they're not able to get that like live reaction.
Yeah.
That maybe
Right.
encourages them to do that or
Right.
something.
And you said that they're going to have single core performance, which is the same as the current A14, as if that's something boring.
No, that's true. That's true.
It's like already way faster than anything that is currently available as a Mac and kind of available as a PC as well, unless you are really
Yeah.
into overclocking to 5-6 gigahertz
Sure.
regularly to push those performance numbers.
Something I thought that was really interesting as far as a rumor is that because of the potentially the way they're going to package this thing, and because the room afforded to them in the case allows, like you said, for sort of a wider thermal envelope of being able to run these things, at a higher performance level than like in an iPhone, is that there's a chance that we could end up with, like, let's say a MacBook Air that is fanless and therefore, completely silent pretty much all the time. So think basically an iPad, like a 12.9-inch iPad Pro, but sort of with that traditional like laptop form factor where you have the keyboard and the trackpad and everything all integrated, and
And
potentially,
it beats the MacBook Pros.
yeah, an even bigger,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, an even bigger battery because there's a lot more room in the case in a case design like that than an iPad Pro. But I've also heard rumors that maybe that Touch could be something that is introduced for the first time, because if you look at Big Sur, which
Yeah.
they have, so they have pushed a 11.0.1, I want to say, is now the beta version of Big Sur that's available for testing. And interestingly, the 11.0 was not available, kind of like how they didn't make 12.1 available, or sorry, 14.1, 14? Yeah, 14.1 available for the iPhone, and that's because 14.1 was the version of the firmware that ran on the new iPhones and therefore had all the new iPhone hardware features baked in. So the thinking is that 11.0 might be the same way for Big Sur. And if you look at the design of Big Sur, it is sort of more touch friendly. I don't know that it's exactly designed for touch, but it certainly is done in a way that might, be more
You
conducive.
can use it if you want it.
Yeah. So if they were
Yeah.
going to introduce touch as a new input method for Mac, this is an inflection point at which they could do it. Although I have heard that kind of everyone is saying like, don't expect really anything new from like a case design point of view. The MacBook Air is going to look like a MacBook Air. The MacBook Pro is going to look like a MacBook Pro. They're not really going to, invent a whole new form factor. I mean, not that they need to either, but if that's the case, then I'm guessing we're probably going to get basically the MacBook Air that you all know and love, just running Apple Silicon, running on ARM, right? Running in a way that hopefully will get us as good or maybe even better performance, and then maybe as good or better battery than the way that it is now. And I think even if that's all they accomplish, I think that'll be a big accomplishment.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's significant or not, but I don't remember if this was done in the past where the invitation was actually on the developer feed. So
Yeah.
if you have a developer account, you get emails about developer news. And I have an account that gets no other emails other than that. So I was curious as to why I was getting an invitation to an Apple event through that account. And I don't remember them doing that for anything else.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that they're definitely wanting the developer community to watch this, possibly because they'll be making new apps, both iPhone or iOS, I should say, and macOS apps can now run on Big Sur. So that's going to be an exciting / very interesting time forward
So
for the future of the
Yeah.
Mac.
does anybody here have any plans to buy anything that gets announced?
Probably not.
It's a good hedge. That's a good hedge. Probably not.
And honestly, it's probably more because of money than it is like I don't necessarily trust what it's going to be.
Yeah.
But for me, it's like I don't know. I have work machine. Like I have a work machine. I have too many Hackintoshes that I don't even use. So they all just kind of sit here until, of course, they become unusable eventually. But one thing that I also think is interesting is, like you said, Ben, I wouldn't expect the chassis to be hardly any different at all, which
Right.
is fine. I think, honestly, like with the change of the keyboard and everything, Apple has a good formula. USB-C is, fairly commonplace now. It's a little bit of a pain, but it's not terrible. And so for me, if I had to guess, I would say that touch may not be a thing on these ones.
Yeah.
Or at the very least on the Pros or something like that. I don't know. They might test it on.
That would be an interesting development. That it's only on the Pros.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's a very
I
Apple
know
thing
that.
to do
Yeah.
nowadays.
Yeah, I know that a bunch of Windows users they love their touch, and they'll pull an Android and just say, oh well, we've had that for years. But if Apple's going to do it, and I probably think that they will in the near-ish future with Big Sur,
Yeah.
because like you say, the icons are larger, control center, all that stuff is very much just it looks touchy.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Plus, with running iOS apps
very
on it, like people are going to be
Exactly.
used to using that app with touch, right? So they're going to be like, "Why can't I
Exactly.
touch this?" So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it even took me some time to get used to like using the simulator with the trackpad when I first
yeah.
started iOS development. So like
Yeah.
having, users do that, I can see there'd be a little frustration
Yeah.
there. So I don't know, maybe they could surprise us next week. I I wouldn't necessarily bet on that too much.
How about you, Dimitri? Do you have any purchase plans?
So no immediate purchase plans, but that always changes the day of the Apple
Of
event.
course.
So
Yeah.
For
who
sure.
who on earth knows what I will be wanting? I don't need it,
Right.
that's for certain.
Right.
But what I will be wanting. I do have like I don't know when they're going to make me send it back, but I do have the hypothetical Apple
Mm.
Silicon machine
Mm-hmm.
that I'm not supposed to talk about.
Right.
So I can still use that for testing. So once again, I don't need
Right.
an official capacity one, and it remains to be seen whether there will be trade-ins and things like that for this generation of transition kit
Right.
with
Hmm.
regard to the past ones. Because if you don't know, Apple did this before with the with the Intel transition, and they asked. It was a much more limited um, uh, developer
Pool.
whatchamacallit, program.
Yeah.
A developer program before, but basically you can either get your money back for it or you can trade it in for a uh, middle of the line iMac, Intel iMac
Mm.
of the time. That said, I am very curious to see, are there still going to be configuration options now?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Because like I guess you can choose between how much memory you need for the kind of workflow that you'll be doing, but it's not like there's going to be five variations of the A14 that you can choose from.
Right.
Yeah.
Because why would there need to be, right?
Right.
Apple can just have their chip that they're proud of, and
Right.
that's the one that you get.
Or GPU
Are there going to be?
configurations, right? Like they're probably it's
Yeah.
going to be integrated on the chip, so they don't. It's just you get what you get.
Hmm. Or maybe
I
you have
know.
two options, like
Right.
baseline GPU or double the GPU.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. I know that what some things will do, just or some other computer part manufacturers will do is like they'll have they'll basically bin their parts. So like the highest binned, highest quality parts, maybe they work on all X amount of cores, and then on some they don't quite meet that spec,
Mm-hmm.
and so they'll disable a few cores. So it's like the same chip, but
Yeah.
it's essentially
They
hardware software
yeah.
limited to not actually use
They did that
that.
with
So
Hmm.
that could be something that could
the
happen.
A12. I want to say like the A12Z or something like that was a chip. It
Oh,
was an
that's
8 core
right.
chip that the ones that like if let's say one of the cores was bad, rather than just chucking that chip, they would allow that 7 core chip to go through with that eighth core just not just disabled because it didn't pass
Yeah,
inspection or whatever, but they could still
yeah,
use
I
those
think you're right.
those SOCs anyway. So
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's very common because the way they make these chips is it's essentially the opposite of a photograph. You just shine light onto a stencil and it prints your chip, quote unquote. And it's very easy for that to go wrong.
right,
Hmm.
So you just need like one little speck of dust entering the light in between, and like a whole section of that chip is toast. But because each section is kind of modular, you can turn things on and off. So
Right.
uh, it's the same thing for screens. Like the reason why high density, large screens are very expensive is because it's very hard to get one that doesn't have defects.
right,
For smaller screens, you can print. What's done actually is you print out quite literally sometimes a large screen and you cut it so that way you get areas that don't have any defects and you can discard the pieces with defects. So that's why smaller screens you can get them in super high densities because it's easy to just keep the good parts. Whereas if you want a 27 or 32-inch, then you have to be lucky to get one that
Right.
doesn't have any such defects. Now, chips are insanely small, so it's easy to throw away tons of them and keep the ones that are good. And for larger chips, you have less chance, which makes them more expensive, to get exactly what you need. So it'll be interesting to see if they do bin. It'll be also interesting to see how often they update.
yeah,
Is this just going to be yearly now? It's like, oh, we need to wait for the iPhone to get new Macs,
that's true.
or is it just going to be something where we're on the same A14 generation, but oh, mid-year we have a version with two more cores?
Yeah,
Like, is that
Hmm.
something that Apple's going to be doing? Because they kind of did used to do that. Anytime there was a new CPU, they did a refresh until
Hmm.
Intel stopped having new CPUs
Yes.
yeah.
regularly.
I mean,
So
the advantage here is if Apple keeps their cadence up, it kind of on balance will be an improvement because even once a year is better than kind of the the recent performance of
once
Intel.
every three,
Yeah, so even
Yes.
that'll be
yeah,
an
it's like
improvement.
The Mac Mini wasn't updated into like since 2018,
Yeah, it went a super long
and
time.
Yeah,
yeah,
from 2014 to 18.
so there's lots
Yeah.
of opportunity there, and it's going to be very interesting to see how Apple carries this forward for the most part. What about you, Ben? Are you planning on buying anything since you
So I
asked?
kind of have my eye on a MacBook Air. I depending on I guess who you ask, I was either very smart or very stupid to buy a 5K iMac maybe like 2 months ago. It was right after they upgraded the late 2020 iMacs, so I got in right after that upgrade. Probably the last I would guess probably the last iMac Intel one that they make. Um, but I wanted a solid development machine, and I also really didn't want to rely primarily, for development on a brand new Apple Silicon architecture and stuff. So, and I wanted the big screen and all that kind of stuff. So, I traded in my Butterfly keyboard MacBook Pro for this iMac, and I love it. I think it'll be a great machine for several years. I don't really have any complaints. I upgraded the RAM in it, so it's nice and fast. I got like kind of I think sort of like the top tier 27 with like the mid tier specs. So like of the three you can pick from, I picked like the high end of the three sort of tiers, and then I picked like middle of the road like specs, sort of custom specs on that. So it's a solid machine that I think will last a long time. But I do actually miss having that portability of the thing, and I've kind of always been a little jealous of people who get to carry a MacBook Air around because I've always had to buy Pros for development because they
Sure.
just didn't have the horsepower that I needed for Xcode. But two things, right? I I don't need it for hardcore development all the time. It'd be great to run Xcode, and I would like to do development on it. But if it's maybe not working for something, I can just go to my iMac, no big deal. And I'm also kind of hoping that the Apple Silicon will perform better in general compared to Intel. So it might be the case that an Apple Silicon MacBook Air is just sort of head and shoulders better than its Intel counterpart, and therefore doesn't suffer from some of the same issues. So I've got my eye tentatively on. I actually traded. I sold my iPad Pro, which I wasn't using a ton, sort of, and I've been sort of collecting those pennies to put towards a new MacBook Air. So we'll see what it looks like. We'll see what they actually announce.
Zero ports.
Yeah, like yeah,
Wireless
there could
charging.
be like serious
MagSafe.
downsides,
There you go.
or it could be that there are issues around like it being first gen that I'm just like, yeah, I
Yeah.
don't want to bother with that. So I might decide not to do anything, but I'm kind of, I would say I'm like on the fence. Like I'm interested, hopeful, but not sort of like I'm gonna buy whatever they announce. Like that's not necessarily happening. I want to see what they do. But if it works out well, I could end up with my first MacBook Air, which I've always really liked the machine. Like I thought it was a really well built and nice machine. I just couldn't really use it for what I needed. But the situation has changed, so maybe it'll be a good kind of what they call like sort of couch portable computer.
And it'll be interesting too to see if they bring in Thunderbolt 4 and
Yeah,
if existing
Yeah.
Thunderbolt devices will work
yeah,
on a completely different architecture.
it's true.
So a lot of stuff is very hardware reliant. Like when we don't think about it because everything is Intel
Right.
nowadays, but that might change big time. So it'll be very interesting to see. Like USB stuff will probably just work because it's just a protocol in the end. But PCIe, it
Hmm.
talks directly to the CPU, and like the individual devices rely on
Right.
that memory is in a certain format because
Right.
they're directly accessing that same hardware that the CPU is accessing. So it'll be very interesting to see if Thunderbolt 4 comes, if they stick to Thunderbolt 3, if they go to PCIe 4, because then you have like huge CPU options that you can just plug into your little tiny MacBook Air if you wanted,
Yeah.
and have that facilitate in the whole process to do all sorts of fun things.
I never thought of it. MagSafe on like the new MagSafe, the Puck MagSafe on this could be interesting. I mean, and it actually would be very,
Just underneath. When it's on your lap, you just have it underneath. It's
yeah,
kind of out of the
Yeah.
way,
it would
right?
be very Apple actually to like, here's this awesome thing that you can now charge your phone or your computer from MagSafe. Downside
Oh,
when you put it on the table and you put the MagSafe puck under the thing, it's then lopsided. Like that would be so perfectly Apple.
but it's ever so slightly lifted to make it more ergonomic to type.
There you go. You have a 5-degree lift.
Where's your you need like your white world. You're doing your Johnny Ive impression. You need got to be in that like nebulous matrix loading program where
No, my
That's
walls
right.
are dirty. Sorry, no perfectly white walls in my land. Okay. So something that we've all come across quite a lot, and a lot of people that listen to our show across quite a lot, is interviewing. So we wanted to kind of do a deep dive into the whole interview process, how you can nail it like a pro. Being pro meaning you get money for doing what you do. Doesn't mean you're any more pro than other pros. Everyone's just a pro once you start getting money. So we want you to nail the interview like a pro so that way you can be a pro. And it's kind of interesting that we are thinking about talking about this right now because Spencer, for instance, is no longer an instructor. He's now a full time developer, and he went through an interview process. Ben has been hiring in the past, no longer hiring, but was recently hiring junior developers. And so we have like two sides of the same coin there. And I myself have also been interviewing for contracting positions. And it was super interesting because when I was interviewing, my wife, who is also an iOS developer looking to uh, get into the industry, noticed that my interview was completely different than hers. Like my experience as a developer with 10 years, like there was no technical questions. It was purely a discussion of like how the product could move forward and things like that. So that was a completely different perspective that she almost found enlightening and was very jealous of. But that's something that comes with lots of experience. So we wanted to go through all the different little subtleties that you might run into and what you should kind of keep an eye out when you are interviewing. So, Spencer, why don't we start with you since you just
Sure.
recently started a new position? What it was interviewing like for you?
Yeah. So I am working at a pretty small company. I think I'm not quite sure. I've only been there for about 3 days, but I think there are about 20 people in the company total, just to kind of give you a perspective on the size there. So what happened was one of the co-founders, who is also kind of the lead engineer on the app, he was the first one to interview me, and really what it came down to was I answered a few technical questions. Just what is X thing? What if you were in this situation? What would you do? I'm not sure, like Dimitri, how much detail you want me to give here. Um, but it was just a few kind of technical questions just to kind of gauge my knowledge, and then we chatted. He talked about the company for a little bit, which probably all in all lasted. The whole thing was maybe 30 45 minutes or so. And then he gave me a take home challenge where it was just a zip file, and it had some instructions to build like a basic iOS app that was it did some things with core animation. It was really just animating a progress bar and kind of messing with colors. Um, and then it had like a Swift playground in there that had a few more like technical questions, more sort of algorithmic questions like, how would you find this letter in this or in this string or something like that. I can't quite remember. I could pull it up if you want, but and then a couple Objective C questions. So it I would say was probably on par with being a fairly technical interview. Although I'd say that it I didn't feel like I was being grilled as much, maybe as a junior would have. I think it was kind of, Dimitri, like what you were saying, where you were already in there, so it was very much less of like an interrogation, more of like a hey, let's see more where you're at type of thing.
Mhm.
Although I did have to do a little bit of coding, so not quite at the level of a senior in that sense, perhaps.
Yeah, and it really does make a difference. I don't know to our listeners if you listened to last week's episode, but I talked a bit about how I got into development, and I did mention that for my current job that I have, I did not really interview for that job, so I got it through connections. It started off as a contracting thing, and then when it came time when they offered me a full time position, my interview ended up just being meeting my boss's boss, and that was it. It was just for formalities more than anything, and that does bring up like the different kinds of expectations that
Hmm.
you come across, because when you submit your resume to a company hoping to get work, they're looking at a pile of strangers, and they don't really know who any of these people are. So they don't have much to go on to kind of classify who is the best candidate from that group. So admittedly, it's not a good experience for either side. Like, you have the interviewer who doesn't know any of these people, and they are trying to look up on the internet like anyone else how to kind of grade these different individuals, and then you as an individual applying need to somehow come up on top of the rest who are all kind of trying their best. So it's very much a tough situation, and it's a lot easier when you can get your foot into that door, or if you know the people, that's like way easier to begin with. So if you have any chance to market yourself directly uh, and meet individuals during meetups or happy hours. There are a bunch of Zoom happy hours nowadays. Join those, meet people, talk with them, let them know who you are, because eventually they're gonna know of someone with an open position, and they might think of you directly, and they might say, "Hey, Dimitri, I know that you were still looking for job work. Is that still the case? Do you want to maybe work on this project with me?" And there's going to be almost no interview for that whole process. They already know who you are. They might have an interview process for formality's sake. So that way they can say, oh, look, we have this candidate and a few others that we're not going to even consider, but we're putting them there. So that way the candidate that they're proposing looks so much better.
Hmm.
So there's all sorts of silly things that go on when that does happen, but it's so much easier to get work in that way. And it's whether you have a ton of experience or not, knowing people and being able to be directly recommended is tremendously useful.
Yeah, every
Yeah,
job I've ever gotten that I really truly enjoyed was basically due to a referral from someone who either worked there or someone who knew that they were hiring and had kind of a connection and sort of then made that introduction. The ones, for the most part, the ones that I've gotten that were, I mean, I've had kind of bad jobs for a variety of like jobs that I didn't really enjoy for a variety of reasons, but the couple that I can think of that I really didn't really like were mostly because I would like, I needed work. I cold applied to a variety of places. I did sort of the normal interview. I got hired, and then the job sort of ended up not being kind of what I thought it was going to be, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. Whereas the ones that I tended to enjoy more are the ones that you get that like side door access where someone that works in the company or someone that has some kind of connection to the company. Their spouse works there or their cousin works there or whatever, right? And they can get you that inside connection, and you get to basically skip a bunch of steps. So you get to usually get right in front of the hiring manager's face. They see your resume directly because you send it to your friend or your whoever it is, and then they put that resume directly in front of that person's face and say, "Here, you should hire this person. They are my cousin or my friend or whatever. They're great." And then you still have to stand on your own merits. Like they have to look at your resume and make sure that you know what you're doing and stuff like that. And you have to. There is an interview process, but it is often it's much better to kind of go in from the side than to do a frontal assault, which is sort of that cold apply to their website, right? Which I found seems to like mostly end up in the bit bucket where it's probably in someone's inbox somewhere, right? The application itself. But I mean, I have a personal story where I did do that, and then like a month later, I had a friend who I didn't know who worked there, who was like, "Hey, we're hiring. Are you still looking for work?" And I said yes, and so then we did that whole side door thing where he put me directly in front of the hiring manager. And then they were like, why didn't, something about this person is great or whatever. And I was like, yeah, just so you know, I applied like a month ago to this exact same job and I didn't hear anything.
Yeah.
And they're like, so then that person was like talking to HR, well, how come I didn't see this person's resume? And it's this whole like finger pointing and whatever. And it's because it just gets lost in the shuffle, right? Like when I was hiring at Lambda School for instructor positions, right? So these are people who are iOS developers who also either have teaching experience or want to get it. I was getting probably, I don't know, 100, 200, 300 applications for any time we would post that job. And 95 out of 100 of those are going to be anywhere from moderately unqualified to what I will say is laughably unqualified. Like the person has skill in something, but it is not even remotely related to the thing that we posted about. And so they're just, I would assume, they're just kind of like posting their, job applications to everything and kind of hoping for the best, which, I can respect that. But as a hiring manager, it's like, that's an immediate no. Like, I'm not even, we're going to send you an automated email, thanks, no thanks, and move on. And I have to do that like 95 times out of 100 because most of the people that apply are just not, it's just not the person that we need. So I can definitely say, Dimitri, that your thing about like it's hard to see the signal through the noise as the sort of the other side of it as being the hiring manager. That's completely true. And I think an effective strategy as a candidate is to recognize that is basically the truth in most companies.
Yeah.
And then attack this from an angle that is not that, because while that does work, it is I would say much more like playing the lottery. Like obviously the odds are much higher than the actual lottery, but like in the sense where you're just sort of like buying a ticket and hoping for the best is kind of how I consider like applying to a place by just sending an application through the little web form. Because it's probably not going to be seen by anyone, by a real human, right? It might get ingested by some machine, but unless they have a really efficient way of pushing those promising candidates in front of human eyeballs, it's just going to end up in a Bitbucket somewhere and no one will ever see it. And you'll be like 6 weeks later, like, how come nobody's called me back? I'm a great candidate. I'm the perfect candidate for this job. It's not because you're bad that you're like not a good fit. It's because no one ever saw it. And that's silly. Like we should as an industry do better than that, but that is sort of the state of the world. So if you know that and you accept that, then you can try and attack it from a different angle and hopefully have more success.
And I don't know. Go for it, Spencer.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say I can definitely attest to that as well. Basically, every job in my iOS development career has been attributed to one person. I have got all of my jobs from that one person because they either gave me the job initially or they kind of recommended me for the next job. So I tend to follow this person, which is awesome.
Thank you, one person. We all know this one person, so thank you, one person, for
yes,
helping Spencer out.
they're a great mentor, and I love working with them. And so my dad, for whatever reason, he would tell this to me like when I was way young, like middle school age, not even like remotely looking for a real job, but he'd always say, "That's who you know," and I'd be like, "Okay, all right, Dad, I get it." Like over and over, like I don't know why you would say it so much, and I was like, "Yeah, okay, whatever. I'll get a job."
Yeah.
But it's true, and just like Dimitri and Ben are saying, it's crazy. When I started looking for a job here fairly recently, before I got this one, I started sending out resumes and CVs and everything to places online, and just submitting those web forms. Like Ben is saying, I didn't get a single response back from any human. Not to say that you won't, but I think there are other things that you can do, right? And if you're in despair and you're like, no, I am an introvert, I don't want to do this, trust me, I think probably all of us are too. Well, maybe not Ben.
No, I definitely
you are.
I may come across as charismatic and outgoing on this podcast, but
from the safe distance behind my screen.
Exactly, yeah, from my own home office where I don't have to actually interact with any other humans in real life. Yeah,
right. We're all like that, and it's not the most fun thing to put yourself out there and basically say, hey, I'm the best, hire me. but it's possible. And you can, if you don't know anyone, like Dimitri was saying, go to one of those happy hours, or go to like your local Cocoa Heads meetup. There's probably one of those everywhere. And I think what is the website? Is it just cocoaheads.com?
Or .org maybe?
Something like
Like that.
Cocoaheads.
We'll put it in the show notes.
.org. Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes. They're all over the world. Just kind of, Cocoa developer community that, they do meetings.
We make hot cocoa.
Yeah, that's all
Yeah,
they
we
do.
make no. They'll do kind of talks on some Apple framework, and it's a cool way to socialize. And sometimes they'll get companies to sponsor it, so you get some food after or whatever.
Help sessions, things like that.
Yeah, help sessions. But it's a great way to network with people that are local. So that's a good way to kind of get your foot in the door of like knowing someone if you don't know anyone, or get on some iOS developer Slack groups or something. But it doesn't have to be anything hard. Or at the very least, you can go on LinkedIn and say, hey, I was looking at this company. It looks like you work here. Can you tell me more about it? Like, anything is going to be better than you like doing a reverse cold call to a company and just handing in your resume. So
and you have experience. Like, imagine all the junior developers who don't have experience that are trying to do the cold call
exactly
approach.
Yeah.
Like,
oh, absolutely.
That's a near impossible for them to even get an audience. If they get an interview, it's sometimes because of a mistake. Like, they thought
Right.
they had a tons of experience, and it's
Yeah.
like the completely wrong position. And like, no one wins in that scenario.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no, it's a bad system, I think, in general. but
Being so
I don't have
incredibly
a
like
solution.
junior phobic, right? This idea that like I can't speak for other industries where they have new people coming in, but for the coding industry, for programming, we tend to be just like afraid of juniors. We like
Yeah.
very skeptical, very dismissive, and I think sort of the root of that like dismissive and skeptical sort of behavior that comes out in the process of the hiring is honestly fear. Like, it's this fear that this person is going to be this sort of net drag on the team, and they're not going to be helpful or productive. And the sad part about it is that that's true. That generally is true if you don't give a crap about the people that work for you. If you don't actually invest in their, like, the only difference between a senior developer and a junior one is, as far as the company is concerned, is that you can hire a senior dev, give them no onboarding, give them no help in setting up their environment or teaching them how the code base works, and they will just muddle through. Like, it's not great for them either, and it slows them down, and it takes longer, and it's not good, and it certainly doesn't help like morale and all that. But a senior can just sort of muddle through for the most part because they've done it before, because most companies don't have they don't have great onboarding, and because you just have enough experience that you're like, I'll just figure it out. But for a junior, they don't have that sort of body of experience to pull from. And so it's just again, it's still doable. It just takes a lot longer and is much harder to do when you have no support. And I think that, like, it just happens to be that the tolerance level for a company to withstand like the kind of wishy-washy sort of rough start of a new engineer, that threat, there's seniors experience that when we come into a new company. It's just that we get it done in a short enough amount of time that it's acceptable. Whereas when a junior does the same thing, it's like 3 months, a month or 2 or 3 months later, and they're still not quite fully on board. It's like, why not? Why are you not like fully integrated?
Yeah.
We've done nothing to help you, and you're not integrated. Why not? But because the senior person next to you got it done, they got on board in 3 weeks, and it's fine. But that's the only difference. The only difference is because the seniors have done it 8 or 10 times because nobody has a great onboarding, and they've just figured out a way to muddle through, and juniors just don't have that. But this underlying skill is still there, assuming that the junior does have training. Like, if you're literally completely brand new to programming, that's a different problem. But if you're a junior level developer, you have the skill to make things happen. You just need actual help and actual mentorship to get there. And I think that's the thing that just never dawns on companies. Like, they just think they can get senior level work for less money. It's like, well, if that were actually true, why would you hire any of us, right? Like, as seniors, why not just hire a sea of juniors? And people have done that. And then, of course, it doesn't go well because they don't have the experience that you're looking for. and they can't architect a whole product necessarily by themselves, and then it doesn't go well. So like it's this like weird collective fantasy that every all programming based companies are in, where they think all of these things are true at once and they're not, and so uh, again, I feel.
Ironically enough,
Go ahead.
it's probably more expensive too,
Yeah.
right? Like if you need to
Yes.
rely on the best of the best to be able to get up and running with your project, you need to pay
Yes.
extra for the 2-3 months that they need to get acclimated to your damn project,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Like they could have gone up to speed so much faster if you had a proper system in place to get them up to
Right.
speed, and then you wouldn't be wasting those 3 months
Yeah.
of top dollar
Right.
like engineering work that
Right.
you had to pay the best person because they were the only one that could
Right.
like just jump into muddy waters like that.
And something
And
something that
it's like so unfortunate.
Yeah, and something that I've always thought was weird was that companies will often be like, well, we have to, like, our work is so important, we have to have a senior developer, right? Like that, we can't accept anyone less than that.
Right.
And like, I don't know if this, maybe this is, I'm going to speak at this point. Now I'm going to filter not just down from programming, but down to like iOS, because that's what I've been doing for the last decade. So at least when it comes to iOS, I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't have value that I can bring to the table as far as building products, building software, architecting it in a way that makes sense and is performant. Like I have those skills, and those skills do differentiate me in a way from a junior, right? So I'm not trying to say that there's no value in having a sort of like a varying skill set among your experience level from your developers on your team, but I will say that often companies seem to like way overestimate the uniqueness, I guess is maybe a good way to say it, of like the problem space that they're operating in, what they're trying to solve. And quite frankly, they don't need a room full of seniors to build most of the things that they ask us to build on iOS. Like they need a senior, maybe a couple of them, depending on how big it is, to sort of architect, to mentor, to guide, right? To see through the vision of what you want to build. And then you could put 5 or 6 juniors on it as well, and it would be just as good, in my opinion, as one that had 12 seniors on it. Arguably better, because I don't know about you, but like trying to manage a team of 12 seniors sounds like a nightmare to me, because the more experience you get and the more
More
skill,
opinionated,
yeah,
right?
the more of a pain you are to everyone else, because you have like stronger opinions, and they're more strongly held, and it's harder to change people's minds, and you end up with lots of baggage, and like it's just, whereas a junior, for the most part, you can tell them something and they will be like, all right, like they'll just sort of, or hey, you should change it, you should do it this way, it's better this way, or, and they'll just accept it. They'll just,
Yeah.
because they don't have 10 years of baggage that they're bringing into that. They are still pliable, and they still are, I think, also open to the possibility of learning new things, which a lot of seniors often are not. So I would argue that like the dream setup is like a couple of seniors to run sort of the team, to provide mentorship and to architect the product, and then like a small bullpen of juniors to do kind of the daily coding. You get, and as long as your team is aligned in that way, where the seniors know their place, which is to provide architecture, guidance, mentorship, that kind of thing, but not order people around and all that little sort of mini fiefdom thing, then I think you can have a really effective team. It's just sad that that is not, most of the time it's like, sorry, seniors only. It's like, but why? You're building an Instagram clone. I mean, not that that isn't complicated or difficult, but you're not like sending people to Mars. You're just building an app with pictures in the news feed. Like that, I can teach a junior how to do that. Like
Yeah.
that's not insurmountable.
And you have to also be careful not to overload that one
Yes.
senior with so much work
Yes.
that they can't go ahead and guide the project, because otherwise they are just flooded. And
Right.
then your team of juniors doesn't know what to do next because they don't have the experience to be able to pull their own weight right away.
Right.
So like you are hamstringing your own team by like putting so much work on their plate that they can't effectively
Yeah.
pull through that work. Like you just have to scale it back to a reasonable level.
Right.
Then they can pull their own weight and you'll get more work done rather than
Right.
just pile that all of it where it's like you have deadlines that were
Right.
yesterday, need to get this done.
Yeah.
And then no one gets any work done because you're chasing something from like
Right.
behind. and that's not really useful to anyone.
So, based on all of the kind of realities of sort of the modern programming industry that we've laid out here, Dimitri, what are your like top 3 tips with all that in mind, right? To if a junior is applying to something like your wife, for example, is a junior iOS developer and is looking for a job, her or any of our former students at Lambda or whatever, what would be like your top 3 tips for kind of cutting through some of that nonsense and like you know because what I would say is that they have time, right? Juniors have time on their hands to be able to sort of hustle and try and get a job, and that since that's the limiting factor, then I think like you should, as a junior, you should focus on like what is the most effective use of that time, and blind applying to 1,000 places on the web, that's a thing you could spend time on, but maybe that's not the most effective. So like if you were going to give them like what are like your side door shortcut kind of hot tips for shortcutting, or what I'm trying to say, short circuiting like some of that process, what would you tell them?
So the first thing is they need to be good at Git. No, I'm just kidding.
That's always your first thing.
That was a joke for Ben specifically. So if there's anything, especially if you're introverted, you need to build on your charisma and your confidence. I have seen, as both someone hiring in the past, I have seen people with zero experience but tons of confidence get very far through the process, because guess what? Everyone up until the hiring manager, they're not technical.
Right.
They will put quizzes and stuff in front of you, but they're not going to check it. They're going to see the automated report that comes out of it, if anything. The recruiters, they are going to go off of confidence.
Yeah.
Like if you need to get through the noise, you need to be overly confident, whether you have the skills to back that up or not.
Yeah.
Just so that way you can get your foot into the door. So that is something that's so important, not only to get to that spot, but also when you are talking face to face with the people hiring you, you need to be priming with that so that they remember who you are, right? Otherwise, you're just yet another stranger that
Right.
they happen to be talking to in this process. You need to be someone that they can remember.
Yeah. Memorable is huge.
In a good way.
Yeah. Yes, that's true. In a good way.
Yeah. Or a funny way. Funny way also works perfectly
That's
fine. But you don't want to be remembered in a bad way ever, because that has long-term consequences that are not useful. But if you can have that confidence, and that confidence, like it can either come from like personal sessions of like telling yourself you're awesome every day. That's one way to do it. The easier way to do it is to practice.
Yeah.
Get good at what you know. You don't have to know everything, but what you do know, get good at it. So that way, if someone asks you a question, you know exactly how to respond to it. I'm not talking about the nitty gritty algorithm questions of you have a linked list and you need to reverse it. That's not useful information for anyone. Anyone who is asking you that question looked up on Google how to interview someone.
Yes.
That's how you get to that point. It's not useful. If there's a more interesting academic problem, is like, oh, you have these people in these three cities and you want to find the most optimal way of doing it. They're not looking for the optimal answer. If you just give them the answer right away, that whole conversation was pointless and they don't know anything about you. They want to see who you are as a person and how you think, and like being able to know what you know, so that way you have enough confidence where you're not pausing during that process. You know what the next steps that you can kind of explore. You know how to ask questions back. That is going to be so helpful to you during that whole process. So that's like number one. Number two, go for it.
Can I real quick just make a comment on that?
Definitely.
Okay. So I want to like maybe like have a quick clarification with that.
Okay.
I think that's 100% true. One thing I don't want people to kind of like maybe take that as is like BS your way through a technical interview, because
it's not going to work.
Right. No.
right, yeah. So like
It's really ineffective for one.
Dimitri's saying like you can kind of more or less BS your way up to a technical interview, but as soon as you're with an engineer who knows their stuff, as someone who even has done like fake interviews with students, like they weren't actual to get a job, I would have students that would BS answers because I'd say, hey, can you tell me X thing about core data, and if they forgot it, and kind of for context, like it had been maybe 6 months or so since they'd last seen it. I get it. Instead of like kind of like being humble in that situation and saying, you know what, I'm not sure, that's such a better
Yeah.
answer than saying, oh yeah, it's this thing, and then just burying yourself six
Yeah.
feet under with a terrible answer. So be confident, but like don't BS someone technical either, is at the very least my
Yeah.
perspective, because interviewers will have a BS meter because they will actually know the things, hopefully, that they're asking you.
And
So
they also have seen they've seen lots of BS answers. So they not only do they kind of have like a general guide, they also have heard the ones that are wrong but popular. And so it's like you're not going to fool anyone. Like you're not going to come up with a new BS answer that like I've never heard that. That sounds plausible. No, that's the same answer that they've heard a
yeah,
million times. It's
exactly.
wrong, and they're going to know it. And yeah, I think that's really good advice.
And something that I did mention with Fernando 2 episodes ago: BS your way through the recruiter process.
Yes.
A-okay. Like,
Totally,
lie about
totally.
how much don't lie, but fudge any numbers that you can. Instead of putting somewhere that you worked for 2 months, like on an entry, say you worked there the whole year. Don't put months. Make it as ambiguous as possible, whether you have little, and try to like maximize the amount of like experience and things you did. Put all the keywords. The keywords are only
Yeah.
for their search
Right.
queries. No one is
Yeah.
going to read the
No.
the keywords and say, I finally found the one person that is good at using AV Asset Writer because they put it as their keyword. So it's like, don't worry about spamming that whole process as much as you can. Get through the recruiter. But once you get to the technical interview, you can either try to BS your way through. The interview is going to be like, and immediately go to the next candidate.
Right.
Like, they're
Yep,
not even going to
exactly.
consider you. They're gonna in fact ignore any other positive answers that you gave for anything
Right.
else, and
100%.
that's not going to help. Or you end up landing the job and you don't know what you're doing,
Yeah.
and you are completely like out of your comfort zone, and the weight of the world is going to be on you because the people hiring you had no idea that you were bullshitting.
Yeah.
So like, that is even worse situation to get through. So don't
Yeah.
BS the technical interview. Be as truthful as possible. If you're not a fit, but you were forthcoming and you did a good job otherwise, they're going to remember you.
Right.
They might
Yeah.
reach out in the future. Always consider that possibility.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Spencer, for clarifying that.
I think the
Yeah.
more diplomatic
I
way of saying like the BS your way through the recruiter part is not to say like I think it's important that we do tell people don't lie, right? Lying is bad. You shouldn't do that.
yeah.
But what you can do
Yes.
is you can create the best plausible version of yourself. And I say that very
Yes.
specifically,
Yes.
meaning like you said, right? Maybe you take the months off, so it's just the year or whatever. Maybe it's a little bit less clear on when exactly you
Round up.
started and finished, right? Like you're not lying, you're just being a little vague about kind of maybe how much experience you have or whatever, because it's very easy to get sort of like kicked out of the process. Like it's very easy for people to find reasons to kick you out of the interview process. Like, oh, they don't have the minimum number of months or years of experience, or they don't have this or that. So and that's the thing is interviewing is a lot like I'm going to use like a football analogy, which I'm not a sports ball person at all, but like the draft, right? Like when you get when sports players get drafted for whatever kind of sport we're talking about, usually it's a matter of like there's 300 people that show up, and then like within the first 2 hours, half of them are gone because it's like, well, you guys are not. You're not a good fit, right? And so it's culling or cutting, right? You're shrinking and shrinking and shrinking the pool until you get down to like, okay, well, there's 40 of you left, and we're gonna pick 35 of you. So we just got to do those last couple of cuts, and then we're going to be good. So it's not really about shooting for the stars and being the one breakout candidate that's the best possible candidate that they ever could have possibly seen. It's about getting past all of their cuts, right? It's like it's getting through all of those points at which they might go, you're cut, right? You're for this reason you're gone. And so I think the best plausible version of yourself is a version where you give them as few opportunities to cut you, right, as possible in that stage of the process, but also don't lie. Like you can go too far with
Yeah,
that, and you
for
can
sure.
straight up lie, and then that's not going to be good. But I think especially as a junior, being a little, a little vague about some of the things that are on there. Like Dimitri said, they're the recruiter part of it. They're not going to look super closely. They're not going to probably catch it. And what you want is you want to get an opportunity to prove your worth. And really, for us as developers, that comes in the technical. That's when we really prove our worth. So if you can get yourself through the cuts that happened before that, then you stand a much higher chance of actually getting the job than if you are overly specific or overly truthful about yourself in maybe those pre things. So like the resume, the cover letter, all the stuff, all the artifacts that they have on you before they actually talk to you in person or over the phone or whatever. It's if you give people, you can be too truthful. I don't know if that makes any sense, but you can be like too specifically truthful about things that give people an opportunity to cut you for kind of a silly reason, when if you had gotten a chance to actually prove your worth in the technical, they won't care about those things. They don't become problems anymore. They're just like, well, whatever, that's fine. You have what we need. You have the skills. We're going to hire you. But if you give them an opportunity to cut you for like one of those silly reasons, it's just more likely to happen. And then you kind of don't get as far. Like I've seen so many people on like some of the programming related subreddits and stuff where I applied to 800 programming jobs over the last 3 months. And like they do those graphs where you see like 800 applications leads to like 40% of them go nowhere, and then like some more they go to like the next stage, and then they get smaller and smaller and smaller. And so I think that's actually both a good way to describe the process or to visualize the process of interviewing, and also a good thing to keep in mind when you're doing it, because again, you're not trying to shoot for the stars and be the breakout that is better than the rest. You're trying to get through the cuts. You're just trying to make it past the next sort of gate that they put in front of you. And that's often like, you don't have to expend all your energy to get through that next gate, like by being the best, because all you really have to do is
you're just trying to get through a funnel.
Yeah, you have to get through a funnel. And remember, it is a marathon, not a sprint. So like if you spend all your professional charisma and energy on this one gate, then you might not have any more for like the next one, and it's a slog. It's a 4 or 5 step process. Even once you get, I mean, my dad he recently got a new job. He has 35 plus years of programming experience, and one of the interviews he went on recently, it was 5 steps worth of interviewing. It's like, what? Why are you not just handing him the job? Like he has like a 4 or 5 page resume that is just chock full of decades of experience. So
that's crazy.
So it doesn't matter. You have 3 months of experience. You have 30 years of experience. Depending on the company, they're going to run you through the same stupid gauntlet that they put everyone through. That doesn't necessarily do anything to sort of really, really get down to the nitty gritty. It's just their process, and it's kind of crap, and it just is what it is. So it's. If you can think about it more as like surviving the cut rather than being the best, I feel like it's a better frame of mind, and like it might help you both do better and also not be maybe so like drained if it doesn't work out, right? Like because you're also going to have lots, especially with
it's a numbers
lots
game.
Of failed starts where you like get into it and then it just like, they were great and they loved me, and then suddenly just crickets. They just stop talking to you, and it's like that could happen for a huge variety of reasons. Where I work, where we were just doing hiring, I was geared up, and we were like 3/4 of the way through some negotiations with people, and then we had a hiring freeze. And it's just like that, just like came out of nowhere. It's like as far as I'm concerned, so it was like, oh well, okay. And so I did what I felt was reasonable, which is contact everyone and say, I'm sorry. We're on a hiring freeze. We're going to keep you in the hopper, and we'll come back and talk to you again as soon as that hiring freeze is over. But I don't know when that's going to happen. Once again, I apologize, and I hope to keep in touch with you. But it could easily be that is what happens, and then the people on the job side just don't do that, and then so you go from like everything's great and it's sounding great and we're making tons of progress, and then you just don't go anywhere. It just stops, right? And I think it's very easy to be like, it's because I'm terrible, right? It's because I don't have the skills. I'm a junior. It's very, very easy to kind of rabbit hole down into that like pit of despair. And remember that it's probably because their process is kind of screwed up and they just didn't email you. And the reason they stopped talking to you has nothing to do with you. It is completely unrelated and is like, for a whole variety of other reasons. So I guess I didn't.
And that doesn't mean you shouldn't have any humility or be humble
Yes.
in that process.
Of course.
Like once you
Good
get to the
point.
technical interview, be yourself.
Yes.
Because you want to get a
Yes.
job where they are happy with you being
Yes.
yourself. Don't be someone that you don't want to be, because you're gonna be stuck with that.
Yes.
In the end,
Yeah.
and that is no good for anyone.
And a lot of times, they'll be looking for, are you a good cultural fit in the company, right? Is like your vibe going to match that of everyone else? Like,
Are you a decent human being?
Right.
Things like
right. Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't know. Well, not really in any of my jobs, but I've heard, like if the interviewer's joking around, you can probably joke around a little bit too. And that might even just help your chances just because they think you'll mesh.
Right.
With the team or whatever it is, if they're upbeat, then
Right.
not like you have to
But-
try to be upbeat or whatever.
But only if that's yourself, right?
Yes.
If they're joking
That's
and
who
you
you are,
never
right, that's
you are
my
never
point.
used to joking with people, and then you try to joke for the first time, that's not going to land well.
No.
Right. Sorry,
so-
what I meant was like if you're trying personally, like if you joke around and you're really trying not to because you're like, oh crap, this is an interview, but they are, then it's like it's probably okay.
Yeah.
Sorry to kind of derail the
no.
conversation there.
This whole thing reminded me of an article I read easily a decade ago about a developer who like was doing the usual thing, but then their friend suggested to them, like this doesn't apply to any junior out here, sorry, but it is an interesting story nonetheless. So their friend suggested to them, let's redo your resume and redo your portfolio to make it look like you were the head honcho at all these companies and projects that you worked on. So they redid everything. They put him in a suit, got nice pictures onto a really boring looking resume site, and they fished around for companies that were interested in hiring for that, because he knew his stuff. He was a developer, and he had somehow become a manager in that whole process, CTO kind of position. That never happened, but they presented it as that for the case of his thing. And something he noticed was not only did several companies contact him, they flew him out first class to meet their executive board,
Nice.
and they were begging. They weren't interviewing him, they were begging him to join because of all the supposed experience that he had on the resume.
Wow.
So, like that be your best self really applies, not to that extent, especially if you don't have the experience to back it up, because that can go sour very quickly. But also be who you are. If you don't want to be doing that, don't put yourself in that situation, because they might hire you because their bullshit detector is all of a sudden not worth anything at that point, because you are suddenly so much higher than them that they're begging you to join. And that works the same if someone is starting off a tech team and they're hiring just anyone that they can find. And if you seem so overly confident that you know everything more than others that were more truthful, they're going to hire you, but then you're going to be stuck with building an entire team and project. And that might be something you want to be doing, but it probably isn't also what you want to be doing. So like really gauge that as much as you can.
Yeah. I think that's really good advice to
so-
kind of be who you know you're going to have to be in the job, right? Like
Yes.
And I think that means you can tailor your resume and everything to the company. Like if it's like a design focused company, then highlight those parts of your design experience without lying, of
Right.
course.
Yeah,
but just kind of put that at the forefront.
arguably you could have a different version of your resume that you send out to every company you apply for, because
Absolutely.
like Spencer just said, right, you're again, you're not lying, but you're sort of reorienting the way in which you're presenting yourself. Remember that your resume is a marketing document. It is not a legal like accounting of your life, your professional life. That's not what it is. And that's not what anyone expects it to be. It's a marketing document. You are marketing yourself to a company. So think of it, again, not as like a legal contract or a legal document, like a birth certificate or something. It's a marketing document. So there's no I see no problem at all with being your best possible self, right? Being maybe a little vague sometimes, by reorienting the way in which you present information, the ordering of it. And I often tell juniors that they should de-emphasize their professional experience and emphasize their educational experience, at least in the case of the people that we've taught, because for the most part they're all adults who have had some kind of career, and then they've gone off and they've engaged at Lambda School, or like when I worked at the Iron Yard, or any of those places where we've taught, and we've been helping people switch careers. They usually have a career that they have engaged in, and then they want to engage in a new career, and so they have both professional experience and they also have educational experience. They're not usually in the same field, and they want to put, like, I was a manager at this place and I worked at this Panera, and like I have, like, you want to show that you are a good worker and that you have the ability to work with others and stuff. So I'm not saying you shouldn't put that on there at all, but maybe you put like the fact that you're a graduate of Lambda School's iOS program at the top of your resume, and then you put your experience next, because you're trying to market yourself as an iOS developer, not as a manager of a store that you worked at, or whatever it is that you were doing before. I mean, I even have had people who were like firefighters, and careers that are sort of, that have like an entire lifetime's worth of career length available to them in that job, and they just chose to to switch for whatever reason. But like, change the resume so that it's showing off what you want to be showing off to these prospective employers, and don't feel like, well, I have to do it in some particular way because either that's how everybody else does it, or that's what all the websites tell me to do, or I got to be careful because I can't be presenting myself in a way that's untruthful. We're not saying to do that, but what we are saying is like, frame it, right? Provide a narrative, a professional narrative in your resume, your cover letter, in the way that you speak to recruiters, in the way that you conduct yourself in your interview. You're marketing yourself. And like, if you think about it from that perspective, and less, I feel like lots of people feel this way about the whole process, is like it's an interrogation, and it's like the police are like, they're shining their light in your face and you're sweating, and it's like, if they potentially think that you're worthy, they might give you a job, and like that's, and that it's very easy to think that way, and oftentimes companies even kind of position their interviews that way, which is dumb, but it is what it is. And so you feel like it's a legal process, and therefore the resume has to be like a specific thing, and the cover list be a specific thing, and the way that I talk about myself in the interview has to be a specific way. But it's not. It's a marketing based thing, and it's also a negotiation. I guess my like top tip is that the entire thing is a negotiation between you and the employer. That means everything is negotiable. That is your salary. That is your benefits. That's how many days off you get. That's your schedule of work. That's whether they give you a budget for buying a chair for your home office if you're going to be working from home, or like whatever. Literally everything is on the table as a negotiation point. And I found that like changing the way I think about the whole thing into that makes me feel more, whether I truly sort of deserve that or not, makes me feel more like an equal in that interaction, and therefore I am more confident because I'm less afraid of being that person with the light in my face and like being interrogated, and then I perform better because I am more confident, and I usually end up with a better situation. And honestly, and I have experience to back that up, but like honestly, I bet you if I were to sort of take that understanding and like push it into junior Ben's brain like 10 years ago when I was first starting, I'm like, this is, you can do, even now you can do this, you can be like this, and you can approach it in this way, and it might help, it might not, but it might help, it might actually make things better. I feel like it would be effective even then, just to kind of help level the playing field and make it feel less like, I think that's the biggest, from what I have heard from juniors, is like that's like the biggest fear that they have, is going into the whole thing not knowing what's going to happen and just feeling like I'm just being like constantly grilled about everything, about like in the recruiter and the technical and the HR thing, like it's all just this grilling. And if you can, I think anything you can do to not feel that way, even if it's like I put cool colors on my resume or something because it feels more me, right? I don't follow any particular like format for my resume anymore. I just do whatever I want because it's a marketing document. It's like, if you don't like it, then that's me. So if you don't like it, that means you don't like me, and you probably shouldn't hire me, right? Like, and maybe that's a naive position to have. Or like maybe that's not realistic or something. I don't know, but like it's worked for me, and I guess that's all we can do, right? Is provide advice that from our own experience.
It's definitely a lot harder too, since we do have so much more experience. So we have a lot more leeway during the
Yeah,
interview process compared to a junior who
yeah,
is hungry for
for
work.
sure.
Uh, but, and this is the big but there, ask questions during your interview. It's a
Yeah.
two-way street.
Yeah.
Yes.
They are interviewing you for the position as much as you are interviewing them to be your employer.
Yeah.
You want to be working in a place that you would be proud of, that you won't have any issues with.
Right.
I see a lot of students, for instance, talk about how they're going to have an interview with Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I am holding back as much as I can during that interaction to tell them they are a horrible company that is actively stepping on human rights and things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I cannot say that during that interaction because they are
Sure.
earnestly trying to get work there. But that is your opportunity when you are joining that team, and to ask, like, hey, what part of Facebook am I going to be working
Right.
on? Is it going to be the human rights violation part, or is it that cool part that it has a potential to change the company from the inside?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I'm not
Right.
going to make any assumptions about how the whole of Facebook runs. There are many people that I know that work there, that don't do horrible things, but they, just as much as we being Americans up until now had to be like cringe when talking about people that are not American, like that's part of it. Like, you can't,
Yeah.
not everyone can just leave because their employer, some part of their employer is like horrible in some
Right.
way. But you can use that interview process to learn about what you'll be doing. I use Facebook as a horrible example potentially,
Yeah.
but there are opportunities to ask, okay, how big is your team? Am I going to be working alone? Am I going to be working with others? Is there a process in place? Am I going to have a chance to learn
Right.
about things? Am I jumping into a code base that's new? Is
Right.
it old? Ask all those questions. Ask anything that you're curious about,
Yeah.
because one, you will that's your only chance really to interview them, and two, that is their chance to learn about what is important to you.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing that, you're already doing way more than most of the candidates.
Yes.
Most of the
Yeah.
candidates are going to be very quiet behind their webcam, not going to say anything, don't want to like exceed their bounds, when like that is not a teammate that you necessarily want to hire. Like, some people like to be on top of everyone, all high and mighty. But most of the people that are putting together a team worth their salt, they want a team that's going to be able to pull their own weight.
Yeah.
So if you are asking questions, like, you are already someone that's going to probably, once you join the team, ask a ton of questions and know things more than anyone else on the team. So that is tremendously useful. So I guess we'll make that our number two. Um, to do well in an interview, you need to treat it as a two-way street.
Yeah.
And
Make it
that
a conversation.
And as a hiring
Go for it.
manager, I learn way more about you by the questions you ask me rather than the questions that I ask you. Because for the most part, I ask everyone the same questions, and you know, and there are answers that are surprising, and there's lots of answers that are very expected, right? Like, it's like, okay, I'm going to ask this question, and I pretty much know what you're going to tell me. Or if you don't, then like that's itself an indicator of maybe experience, or whatever. But what is way more useful to kind of differentiate, right, between one candidate or another is honestly what they contribute that is unsolicited. So like when you ask a question as a candidate to an employer, that reveals, like you just said, Dimitri, like a whole ton about like what you value and how inquisitive you are and all that kind of stuff. And honestly, the like sometimes for me when I'm hiring, the thing that basically differentiates one candidate from another, and maybe makes one person move on and one person not move on, is like the fact that they ask questions for one, and then also kind of what they asked about. Like if they asked about like, oh, that's a really good question that maybe I should maybe incorporate that answer into things that I tell candidates going forward, because it's stuff that probably everybody would want to know, but I wouldn't have thought to tell you, right? Like those are the best. That's like the best kind of scenario. And it's like, well, you're insightful, right? You're thinking about like way more than just being grilled about technical questions. You're really thinking about like what's going to be like for me to be here as an employee, and how am I going to fit in? And I think if you can showcase that in an interview, that really makes you stand, like we were saying, makes you memorable, right? Makes you stand out in a good way. Um, and also, there's no better way to like level the playing field than to ask a question from the candidate to the employer that makes the employer squirm a little bit, like where they're kind of in the hot seat. Like it's, for one, super fun because you're like, haha, finally, like the tables have turned and you have to perform for me. But then also it's really helpful because they either will kind of figure it out and give you an answer that's acceptable, or they will squirm and they will not have a good answer, or they'll make up some nonsense. They'll try to BS you, right? Like they will be caught off guard and not be able to answer it effectively. And then just like when you do it to them, that is a super strong signal for you that like
You get insight about
yeah,
the
you're like,
company.
maybe I don't want to work here because that's a really
Yeah.
You
important.
get bargaining chips.
Yeah,
Like
yes,
if you ask a question like, okay, what happens if the client comes and they say everything is broken,
right,
and it needs to be fixed now, and it's the weekend and it's Christmas and you are abroad. Like if you ask that question and they have no answer for you,
right,
that means A, they have no process in place
right,
to prevent that.
right,
And two, if you're really going to be working there, they're going to feel bad about the fact that you seem like you know more about how to have a process in
right.
place than they currently do.
Yeah,
And if you ask, okay, the offer was for 80, and you ask, no, I want 120.
right,
Like I'm not even
Yeah.
considering this,
right.
and I was hoping for something. They might consider it.
Yeah,
They might make a huge jump in salary because it seems like you know everything, you know way more than you do. I was joking to Ben earlier when I said the number one thing you should know is Git. You can learn Git in 2 weeks. You can
yeah,
buy a book
Yeah.
and go through all the pieces that make Git what it is, and you can practice that. It's easy to practice. It's a pain. No one wants to do it, which is why no one does it.
right,
Which means that if you practice it, you can be the best person anywhere that knows everything about Git, how to fix every little weird problem that can ever come up. And then when you ask questions that like, see, oh, do you have a code review process in place? Do you have this? Do you have that? You're going to make them feel so bad because I can guarantee you, any team you join does not have a process in
no,
place. Like you're kidding yourself if you think that you set one up.
yeah,
And if you do find the place that does have a process in place, it's a dream made like come true,
right,
and they're going to realize it immediately because of the questions that you're asking. So you're immediately hired.
yeah,
So like it's I joke about this constantly, but every student that I have, I force them to go
right,
through like arduous Git process, not the easy
Yeah.
way out of
yeah,
going through it, but I force them to do it the hard way, because if they can practice that and they can be a little bit confident about that, any team they join, they know more already about Git
right.
than the senior developers on that team.
I
So
have a
enough
perfect
about Git for me.
analogy for that. Being the Git expert on your software team is like being a septic tank technician, where nobody appreciates or values your skill in that particular thing
Until it comes up.
until the bathroom gets backed up, and then suddenly you are like the most popular person
The savior.
around,
Yep.
right? And you are everyone's savior. Like it's a skill that no one really values until basically everything goes sideways, and then you are just like the best person ever. So I think that's like a secret super skill that you could have that would make you.
It takes no effort.
Yeah,
Effort at all.
right,
I can guarantee
Yeah.
you a book on Git is like this thick. It's not even as thick as like the Big Nerd Ranch books.
right,
Like you can go through that in 2 weeks. You can practice it. You can get better at it in
Right.
your own projects. You can
Yeah.
try different things out. Be as like as flexible as possible for any situation that come up.
right,
And that kind of leans into another point. Don't have an opinion. Having an opinion is often bad because it's not going to match the opinion of the people interviewing you.
right,
If someone asks you a question and you have a one-word answer and that's it, one, that's a super boring conversation, didn't go anywhere, and it might be the right answer, but it's boring. Have
Yeah.
the right answer, but also have the alternative that could easily be considered. Talk about why the answer has its problems and why the alternative could be a potential better way in different situations. Now, you might not have the experience to pull this off, like especially if you haven't played with many alternatives, but do know that the thing you know is not the only way to do something. So acknowledge that, especially during the interview process. And don't, like, if someone is asking you, oh, what are the benefits of Swift versus Objective C, and you have nothing but good things to say about Swift, and then you say Objective C is old and this and that. Like, if their code base is Objective C, you are off the table. at that
Yep.
point. But if you can acknowledge that Swift has its issues and Objective C has its benefits, you might be the only candidate that um, acknowledged that fact. So that is something that you should definitely consider. As a final point that I do want to bring up, have something to show.
Yes.
Like I've interviewed
Yeah.
so many people that when I ask, "Can I see some code you wrote?" Nothing.
Yeah.
They not even via email afterwards can they show me something
Yeah.
that they wrote. I'm not asking for full access to a code repo. Come to the interview. Well, Zoom is even easier now, but come to the interview prepared to show your screen, prepared to show something. You don't have to like blow every NDA under the water, but have something prepared that you can show that you're proud of, that is well put together, that is like well
Yeah.
documented, not super janky in terms of formatting, because that's
Yeah.
like the easiest way to cross someone off the list. If
Yeah.
you have no input into how they kind of code, then it's like you don't know who you're hiring
Yeah.
at that point. You don't
That's
know
your
what they're
job.
going to do to your precious code base if you cared
Yeah.
about it. So it's like it's really nerve wracking as someone hiring for that.
I've been giving our
Yeah.
former students advice on various things, and something that I've been telling them is basically exactly that. That like, and not only for the reasons that you just outlined, but also because you don't know what's going to look like when you go in as a candidate to be able to show off your technical skills, right? You don't know what they're going to ask you to do, whether it's going to be like whiteboarding, or it's going to be a take-home test, or it's going to be nothing, or it's going to like you typically don't have any idea what they're going to try and sort of how they're going to assess your technical skills. And so one thing, and because of that, it can be very nerve wracking because you're like, I don't know what to study. I don't know how, like I'm not going to do poorly because they're going to ask me some weird thing that I'm not going to have studied. And that all could be true. But the one thing that you do have control over is you have the ability to, like you just said, Dimitri, walk in with a prepared something to show them, right? A little iOS app that you build or whatever, right? Whatever it happens to be. And then not only should you bring that, but I think you should push to show it. So even if they don't
Definitely.
ask, right? Even if
Yeah.
they don't ask, because they may very well not ask to show to see something like that, you should push to show it to them anyway. Because to me, there are no downsides. Like, you're showing initiative, you're showing that you brought something, you're ready to talk about it. And guess what? You're gonna be a rock star in those 5 minutes where you're describing your own code. You're gonna sound like the most knowledgeable programmer on the planet because it's code that you wrote that you're very comfortable with. So that's something to keep in mind. Is it should be code that you wrote. It should be code that you're comfortable with. You should be like excited
Yes.
and confident and ready to talk about it. But you have the ability to make sure that happens because you can do all that ahead of time. You can walk in with a guaranteed win because you know what you're going to be showing off, and so that shows confidence and technical ability. Don't shy away from sort of extolling the virtues of what you did, even if it's not super complicated. Like, dig into some network call, or like make sure that you get a chance to show off. I'm not just regurgitating a script someone gave me, or or whatever. I actually really did write this, and I really do know how it works, and I really can explain it to you. Make sure you can get that across in a couple of minutes, and then push to make that happen, even if they don't ask. Because
And talk about the bugs and how you fix
yeah,
them. Like
Yeah.
it's not all
Absolutely.
about everything that you're perfect about.
right,
It's how you can improve
yeah,
and fix something as well. And even if there's a bug that you can't fix, bring it up. Say,
yeah,
hey, this is something that I still don't know about.
right,
Like I would like being a part of a team that I'm not used to.
hmm
Maybe I can get that experience to kind of riff off of
there's
different
that
solutions. Like
humility you talked about
involve
there,
yourself.
right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And like the only reason an interviewer would ask you about like sorting algorithms is because they don't have the opportunity to see your actual code.
Right,
They're trying something
right,
to gauge you against everyone else.
yeah,
Immediately, if you
Yeah.
show your own stuff, you are above everyone else. And it's
yeah.
only you're gonna be within the group of the people that showed their stuff, and you are the only ones that are going to go to the next stage at
And
that
even
point.
if you kind of sucked at the other stuff that they ask you to do, like, for a fact, those 5 minutes, I'm going to be a rock star, right? So from a confidence beforehand perspective, I feel like even if you feel really nervous about everything else that's going to go on, you have control over those 5 minutes that you're going to push to try and show this off, and you're going to be excellent at it. So even if the other parts of it don't go great, like Dimitri just said, right? Not only do you know you're going to do well in that part, but also, quite frankly, that is probably going to be the thing that they remember the most,
remember the
right?
most.
And
Yeah.
that could very well put you over the edge and get you through the next cut, right onto the next step, where other people who didn't do that, didn't get there. And as an interviewer, what I what I always want, what my dream interview is somebody who can answer my questions in a way that is, honest and also accurate. Um, but that's table stakes. That's like the bare minimum. If you can do that, then you're the same as everybody else who got through the interview. What to me keeps people in the process and they don't get cut is I want to be surprised by you in some positive way. And so if I'm surprised by your performance in some positive way, that is almost assuredly going to push you into the next round. And it's going to, when I have to make those cuts, when I have to say, okay, I interviewed 10 people, only 2 or 3 of them can advance to the next stage. The 7 people that get cut, I mean, depending on how everything goes and whatever, people might bomb the interview and then they get cut for that reason. But like, if essentially, let's say that they're all basically the same from like an experience level and they're all basically the same from like a performance in the interview perspective, what's going to push people into the next round and not get them cut is that positive surprise. If they surprise me in some way, in a positive way in the interview, you're moving on and the other people are not. And it's not that the other person isn't good. It's just that like in some respects I gotta do this. I have to narrow the field. And so you gotta give me a reason to keep you, basically. And to me, surprising me in a positive way, showing off some cool app you worked on, and like you said, both showing the accomplishments, the trials and tribulations of solving bugs, and maybe even asking for advice on a bug that you can't solve. All those things would surprise and delight me in a positive way and show me that you're a real developer. And I certainly would hope that that is the goal of interviewers, right? Is to find good, competent developers, no matter where they come from, no matter how young or old they are, what gender they are, what race they are. Doesn't
You want to find someone you want to
You
work
want to
with,
find someone you want to work with,
ultimately.
Yeah.
and it should none of those things should matter. But what does matter is sort of your confidence, your charisma, those kinds of things, and just your kind of relatability when it comes to code. And so if you don't feel confident about being able to be relatable in those silly little contrived examples they always have you do, bring your own code with you, and then at least you know in that 5 minutes that's coming across.
On that excellent note, this week's episode is brought to you by Sticky Widgets. Sticky Widgets is the absolute easiest way to put a sticky note on your home screen and edit it quickly. It's so easy, you never need to open the app itself. Add a sticky widget to your home screen through the iOS home screen editor and tap on it to edit. That's about it. Of course, there's tons of customization options as well: font, color, text size, alignment, all conveniently located in the system's edit widget interface. Add as many sticky widgets as you'd like, or put them in a smart stack. Sticky widgets are digital sticky notes for your phone. Use them however you'd like. Here's a pro tip for code completionists. Need a quick shopping list, but it's hard to access your phone while wearing a mask? Just put a widget in the Today view and swipe over from the lock screen. It couldn't be easier. Sticky Widgets is a free download on the App Store, and additional font and color options are available for a one-time in-app purchase. Thank you so much to Sticky Widgets for sponsoring Code Completion. Check out Sticky Widgets on the iOS App Store today. So now that we went through our topics, it's time for Complete the Code, where we quiz our listeners on your knowledge of Swift, Apple, and all things development. Ben, it's been a few weeks. Can you remind us of the prompt?
All right, so last week's winner is actually Joel Grimmer, and his answer is if there's a technical name for it, I don't know what it is, but I believe the crash would occur because the twin for an instance of person could be deallocated before the description is read, since the object holds a reference to its twin but doesn't own or retain it. And that is the example that we gave a couple weeks ago, where we have a class person, and that class has a way to make twins where you can have two person objects be twins of each other. And the concern there was if you do that, if you make them twins and you make these relationships and these references, depending on how you design it, you could end up with some errors or some crashes in the code that you've got. So the answer to the question for that prompt is the unknown reference will crash if it no longer points to a valid instance, even though it's being used as an optional. Using weak instead will prevent this crash, but may lead to less performant code in some circumstances, because the weak references will need to be managed behind the scenes, whereas unowned references do not. So that's kind of the major difference between unowned and weak, is that unowned is basically a use at your own risk kind of scenario, so it can cause crashes even if that sort of underlying thing is an optional, normally optional to kind of protect you from a crash. In this case, it will not because it's unowned. Whereas a weak one is safer, but the downside, like we said, might lead to certain performance issues depending on what you're doing. This week we have a new prompt. So we've got, you'll see it if you're listening to the podcast, we've got it as your chapter art, and if you're watching the video, you'll see it on screen. So we've got an array, we've got a reference to an array, and then we have a variable that is a copy of that array because the arrays are value types. And so the question here is, if we create the first array, we then create the second array, which is just a copy of the first one, and then we, on that second array, we try to add a new element. Basically, what key API allows for Swift arrays and dictionaries to implement the copy on write technique? And so again, look at the prompt and kind of see what we're doing there. And if you can let us know what key API is used for that, go ahead and tweet at us with the code completion hashtag. And if you're right, we'll shout you out in a future episode.
And it's a very useful technique to build your own types that are copy on write, which is not automatic. So you do need to use that technique. It's part of the Swift language. Happy digging. So that brings us to compiler error. And I'm going to make this a quick one since we are running long. So today's compiler error is an interview for both Ben and Spencer. So we have our classic interview questions. Let me start a screen recording.
Oh, not sorting. Oh, man.
So we have a few sorting algorithms here for you to figure out, one of which is completely bogus and the other which are equally bogus but actually real. So let's go through them. There we go. Okay, so Neuralsort makes use of a convolutional neural network to sort at O to N speeds on average, though the worst case can take quadratic time. So we've got some novel sorting algorithms here. We have spaghetti sort is capable of sorting its contents at O(n) speeds, even in the worst of cases, but requires a quadratic amount of memory in the process. Bogosort uses the power of random shuffling to achieve a computational complexity of O(n) in the best of cases, but is unfortunately not stable in the process. And named after Tim, TimSort is used in Swift 5 to perform sorting needs in arrays, which is especially tuned to reversing the order of an already sorted collection. So let's go ahead and start with you, Ben.
So these
Which
all
one
sound
do you think is
fake.
There's a Wikipedia page for this. It is awesome.
That's fantastic. I'm going to look that up when we're done. Again, I just immediately am drawn to TimSort because it just sounds, of all the bogus ones that are here, that sounds the most bogus. But it also just seems just bogus enough for it to maybe be true. I don't know. This one is going to be probably a shot in the dark. Let me just look and see if there's anything that sticks out as far as maybe as being more bogus than something else. But the random shuffling one is pretty funny. That it's O(n) in best of cases, but it's not stable, which means it's worthless. I'm just gonna go with my gut, and based on the one that I just sort of was drawn to immediately, I'm gonna say that TimSort is fake. That's the compiler error.
So when a sorting algorithm is stable, you may not know this as a senior developer or as a junior developer or any developer because we don't deal with sorting algorithms on a daily basis. But that means that if two items are sorted but they are different, and then you resort the array, it might shuffle those items around, even though if they were correctly sorted or not. So Bogosort may mix up things that were in a certain order but still sorted properly.
Okay. So not broken, just not deterministic every time to the sort of the same outcome.
Yeah, there's not necessarily a worst case that's listed or a typical case.
Right,
it's
right,
just
right.
the best case.
Got it.
Okay.
I'm still going with TimSort. That just sounds super fake.
So, Spencer, what do you say? Is there a Spencer sort that I should have added?
No, I would be the person you would never call for sorting, for sure. Can I get a clarification here?
It depends.
Are these sorting algorithms all like used in iOS, or are they just general sort algorithms that could be used in potentially different places than like Apple hardware.
In general, the only specific one to iOS that may or may not be true is the Tim sort, since
The
it's
Tim
Swift
sort.
5.
Okay. I was gonna say like the Neuralsort is like I guess I could see that running on Apple hardware, but like using a neural network and all of the machine learning hardware that we have on Apple SoCs and stuff. But that felt a little bit weird to me. Uh, yeah, everything else I don't know. I kind of want to go with 4 as well, and I'm not quite sure if this is true, but I was working on something to like sort pixels in an image, and this was years ago at this point, and I didn't do a ton of research, but it's from what I read and at the very least what I remember, it kind of seems like Swift will pick out. I mean, I guess it says it's used in Swift, not it's the form of sorting arrays. But I want to say that it would actually pick like an algorithm based on maybe the size of your array or something. So I could definitely be wrong there.
I think with
Swift
this one,
5,
you
so
have a
it's
1 in 4
certainly
chance
changed.
of getting this right. Like, it just seems so crazy.
I okay, all right. Then I'll go. Yeah, no, I swear it's going to be something like the time or space complexity is going to be off in one of these
Yeah.
or something.
I wasn't that mean this time.
Okay, good.
You weren't. Oh, okay. Um, I'll go with Neuralsort. We'll do something different than Ben.
Bold move.
Okay, so let's go through the ones that you did not pick. So let's start with number 2. Spaghetti sort is a real sorting algorithm, so that one is true. Good job there. So specifically, it will run. It will copy the array to n cores. So if you have 5 things to sort, you have 5 cores, and then each individual core will do n operations. So like distributed, it's NON every single time.
Right.
It just uses an amount of memory per core because you need to duplicate the
Right.
array every single time.
Right.
So not at all practical, but very fast. So that one is true. Bogus sort is also a sorting algorithm. You randomly shuffle, and in the best case, in one shuffle, you have your sorted array. In the typical case, I forget what the complexity is, but it's just like under typical random sorts, it's going to take this many times until you get the correct thing. But in the worst case, it's just infinity. So that is
Right.
a minor downside
Ooh.
in terms of
Minor
sorting
downside.
your array. So with that out of the way, let's go to number 1. So Spencer thinks this one is a code completion. Neuralsort makes use of convolutional neural networks to sort at O to N, and I said that I wouldn't be mean with the complexity, and unfortunately, I was mean because I completely made up Neuralsort. So this one is the compiler error. Good job,
Nice.
Spencer.
Nice.
So
Thanks. That was a
Neuralsort is not
total
a thing.
guess.
I double checked on Google, so I have that to back me up.
Not yet, anyway.
But yeah, I would assume it kind of you just like have a neural network and you just kind of give it your data and it spits out something that's almost sorted, and then you kind of sort again just to make sure it's actually sorted,
Yeah.
because how can you trust it otherwise?
Sure.
But yeah, I just kind of made that up. I thought it would be cool to have a sorting algorithm based off a neural network, which is all the hot thing. I should have used blockchain too. That would have been another equally good name.
Yeah.
So that means Tim
and
Sort
that
is
leads us-
real.
That means Tim sort is real. It's named after Tim, and it is in fact used in Swift 5
All right.
to sort arrays. So anytime you sort something, you are using a Tim sort. And I forget why. Like, there's actual reasons why this is a good sorting algorithm, especially if things are sorted properly and you need to sort in the reverse. It does so in like a few passes, which is much better than most sorting algorithms. So there's lots of good decisions. Spencer, what you brought up about how depending on the size, different algorithms would be used. I'm not sure about sorting, but I do know NSArray uses that for its actual backing. Like in some circumstances, it's a
Okay.
plain array. In others, it's pieces of memory that are not even connected. And sometimes it's a circular buffer. All sorts of shenanigans go under the hood that it behaves like an array, but it's not really an array, because if you need to insert one thing into an array of a million things, that's not really performant, but it can be if you just not use an array. So I hope you enjoyed our our interview themed code compiler error there. I thought it was apt for the discussion.
Yeah.
Uh, and that brings us to our closing. So, as always, I want to personally thank everyone for listening in this week. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Code Completion to know when new episodes get released. And feel free to tweet at us if there is a topic you'd like for us to dig into. Most importantly, as a small podcast, please be sure to share this with your friends and family who are also interested in any part of the process of app development. It's really your support that enables us to continue doing this, and we hope to grow a healthy community around everything that we discuss. So once again, I want to give my thanks to Spencer, who is at Spencer C. Curtis. That's SpencerCurtis on Twitter. Ben, who is at Ferris Guy. That's FerrousGui for joining me this week. My name once again is Dimitri. You can find me at Dimitri Bunil. That's DIMITRI BOUNIOL. And we'll see you all next week.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.